How was your week, man, considering you were smarter than most from about Tuesday on of last week?
The week was good, just enjoying what's supposed to be one of the quietest weeks of the year in college football coverage. The coaches are all away on vacation, enjoying some hard-earned free time. I'm just trying to get to the lake, and instead I'm on the phone half of Wednesday when I should be packing the car, tracking a story that wouldn't get released until Friday afternoon when I'm on a boat and I have one bar of service left, and that's when the news starts to break. But that's just how it works in this
So
job. Yeah, the Evan Cooper thing, uh, fascinating for a lot of different reasons, but
you were by
certainly,
far and away of anybody that I know ahead of the game. How did that
well,
happen?
Pete Thamel's ahead of the game, right? Like he's the one that
And
put it out there.
yeah, your radar was pinging earlier
It
than
helps.
earlier than anyone ever.
You're only as good as your sources, and I've got pretty good sources, so that allows me to sometimes be able to chase things. But I still don't have a full picture of what I don't think a lot of people have a full picture of what happened. We have the end result, right? Like I was trying to find out what was going on, who potentially was being interviewed, all of this before the news came out on Friday. And so and I wasn't 100% sure if it was a situation where Evan Cooper was definitely gone or Nebraska was looking to add to its staff on the off chance that maybe they were going to make that decision later. There was just a lot of moving pieces in all of this. And, hopefully we get the opportunity to talk to Matt Rule and John Butler. And I don't know if we're ever going to clear anything up in that regard, but we certainly can learn some more information. But the end result is Nebraska has a different defensive backs coach. Nebraska, for the second year in a row, is replacing an assistant in the month of July. And Nebraska finds itself, with a completely different coach at a critical position ahead of a critical season. And I don't think any of that should be discounted. I mean, it's a big deal. And it seems, if we jump into the analysis of the change, it seems like Matt Rule came out of the whole thing with a coach that has a great resume and a great track record. It's just a question of how quickly can he, assimilate to that room or the room assimilate to him, I guess, because ultimately those guys have to go out and represent him and represent Nebraska. And no one's going to give you a pass because you changed your defensive backs coach in July. Like you're going to have to go play well. I mean, that's still the expectation.
Chafe, was there any part of you that was sort of just wondering, like, okay, we've got kind of an unlimited availability of coaches to coach on field now? Did you think they maybe were just going to get help for a room that's huge and has several different types of positions that need coach? Like, did it cross your mind that you're just like, maybe they're just getting help?
Yeah, I mean, so when you don't have all the pieces of the puzzle, you certainly do some game theory of the different things that could be going on. I mean, my brain went anywhere from maybe they're moving Evan Cooper, a guy who self-professed wanted to be Mel Kiper Jr. at some point in his career. Maybe he's moving to a more, designed evaluation role because that's going to be kind of more of his future. There was a thought of mine that they were replacing the assistant defensive backs coach and they were putting somebody on staff that had a lot of coaching chops, that if Tony White were to leave, you're just sliding the pieces around in the next offseason. You don't have to go through the coaching changes. I've had multiple different people tell me that Matt Rule, one of the reasons he likes to promote from within is he doesn't want to hire coaches he's never worked with or seen work before. So if someone is going to get moved or elevated, that assistant defensive backs coach role would allow you to start them in a spot, see what they can do. And then if you have to change the pieces, if Tony White ends up taking a head coaching job, you have that option. And then, of course, there's also the option that something happened with Evan Cooper and Nebraska needs to make a move. Now, that's the hardest one to sort of understand because, again, today's July 9th. When I was deep into this, it was July 3rd. And then the news comes out on July 5th. So it's a weird it's just it's an unusual story. It's the sort of thing that seems like it only happens at Nebraska. Again, Matt Rule's been here for 2 years. He's had to replace 2 assistant coaches a month before the season starts. Like, that's not normal stuff. That is unusual, and yet here we are. And so, Nebraska has made the most of it, and they have to move forward. But I have a lot of questions, not so much about the defensive back stuff, and I'm sure you guys have talked about this, but Evan Cooper's real value to me, in a lot of ways, his fingerprints are all over this roster.
Yep.
There are a lot of guys that are on this Nebraska team that would not be on this Nebraska team, not because Evan Cooper necessarily recruited them, but because he, in the way that my brain films it, he's sitting in a dark room watching grainy film, poring over some other player and falling in love with a defensive back that keeps popping up on his screen. He's sitting in a room wondering why the hell no one else is offering Jalen Lloyd when he sees one of the fastest athletes on the field and a guy that could potentially play defensive back for him if he can convince Matt Rule that he shouldn't be a wide receiver. He didn't see a guy that shouldn't have gotten an offer, and now we're talking about Jalen Lloyd, or at least I'm talking about Jalen Lloyd, as a potential all Big Ten wide receiver at some point in his career. That's an Evan Cooper guy. I mean, Jeremiah Charles, Evan Cooper guy. Like, go back to the defensive lineman last year. I cannot think of his name off the top of my head. He ended up with USC. Carlin Jones, Evan Cooper guy. He's watching Bryce Turner film, and the coach is like, I know you're infatuated with Bryce Turner. I want you to look at this defensive lineman. He's enamored with him immediately. Nebraska jumps in with an offer. Like, he was such a big part of their evaluation staff, and Rule trusts him in such an implicit way that replacing that, I don't think they have that in their program right now. I don't know who the next guy is, but whoever that person is, they have some big shoes to fill. And we don't think about that on the outside of things because we're always talking about, what it means for the cornerbacks. And is Tommy Hill going to have the same growth under John Butler that he showed under Evan Cooper? And can they get the safeties ready? But because recruiting inherently is my job, I'm over here thinking, okay, so who's the new architect of how they're putting this thing together? Because that was a hat that he wore, even if nobody really recognized it from the outside.
So I'm kind of looking at this the other way, or another way, from the outside looking in. I think this gives Nebraska an opportunity to kind of realign how they're doing things internally, not only from an evaluation standpoint and things of that nature that you're talking about, but also how to do business, right? Where something happens and there's a shift, and it's like, okay, how do we get better from this across the board? If you're looking for a glass half full and it's something outside of potentially hiring another quality defensive backs coach, maybe it's just Nebraska's infrastructure and how they do business as a whole. Maybe that tightens up, because when things like this happen, it really forces everybody to take some self-inventory across the board. Is that too deep, or you think that that's something that is on the table?
No, I think that's definitely on the table. In a weird way, you just made me think of, I'm going to reference a movie there's a chance that neither of you have seen, but there was some film scenes in Omaha, Up in the Air. Are you familiar with this George Clooney movie, either one of you?
I am not.
Yeah, it's the one where they're firing everybody. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he has this whole spiel where after, he's letting someone know he's firing them, but then he's telling them many people have sat in your chair and they've went on to do better things, because instead of looking at this as the end of something, you should look at it as the beginning of an opportunity for you to do something different. And so, if you want to use that for Nebraska, moving on from Evan Cooper and what that means for the recruiting aspect, it's an opportunity for them to align differently. It's an opportunity for them to put their recruiting operation in a different manner, or for Matt Rule to do self-inventory and to decide, okay, we've had to make some real changes. It's not just Evan Cooper that's gone. They've made changes in their personnel department going all the way back to the offseason. So they have an opportunity here to reshift how they want to do things. And there's no reason why they can't be better for it. I certainly wouldn't make an argument against that, but they're going to have to shift something, because the way they were doing things and the reliance that they had on Evan Cooper, that's now gone. And so who steps into that role, or how many people step into that role, or how Matt Rule chooses to divvy up those roles are going to be really interesting. And that's sort of what I want to hear from him when we get the opportunity to talk to him about this decision.
Schaefer, do you think at all when you heard the staffers talk, the recruiting staffers specifically, does that kind of ease your concern at all, where they talk about having the best database in the country and all the groundwork they do? Obviously, Evan Cooper had an eye for seeing those types of things, but do you think it seems like they've really tried to put a infrastructure in place for other people with talent evaluation skills to be able to succeed in that environment and not have it be so heavily dependent on one guy's eye?
Yeah, and I don't want to make it seem like it was just Evan Cooper who was saying yay or nay on everybody, but I do believe that he was watching film of every person in Nebraska's class, whether it was his position or not. It does and it doesn't. I mean, it's sort of the same thing I've heard from every recruiting staff that sat in those spots under a different head coach. I mean, I know Nebraska under Scott Frost felt very strongly that they were building one of the best social media databases ever assembled, that they had inputs in place that could find red flags of certain social media posts, and they could learn more about players that way. Everybody has their thing, or everybody sort of has their idea of how this can work. And I have no doubt that Matt Rule has some unique ideas for what they can do and what the recruiting staff can do. Ultimately, it just comes down to, it's not so much who they have back there, it's does he trust them? Like that's kind of the big loss in all of this. He's trusted Evan Cooper implicitly. This is a guy that is from the outside looking in, a pretty extreme micromanager. And so when he gives Evan Cooper these roles and he trusts and values that opinion, it's not just like he's going to find one or two people to replace that. They're going to have to earn that level of trust. He's going to have to still be able to divvy up and give this work out, because he can't do it all himself. It's just whether he's going to be able to trust him to continue to do more and more and more. He's going to ask him to do more, but are the results going to be good? That's what you're waiting to see.
Yeah, the more I'm listening, I it's kind of what I thought over the weekend. And Coach Rule himself said, okay, how do we get better and grow from this? I think if they take that question, which is a real one, and he's trying to figure it out, it just puts everybody on high alert. And I mean everybody, right? Support staff, coaches. If this can happen to somebody that's as close to Coach Rule as Cooper is, and he's clearly has a unique relationship with Coach Rule, especially given the autonomy, I think this is the perfect opportunity to dial in and button it up across the board for the staff. If it's me, I look at this as a way for everyone to get better and dial in. And Schaefer, I actually like the fact that it is so close to the season. It's almost like a scare tactic. They're on such a limited time crunch. It's like, oh shoot, we better get our butts in gear, right? Like that's kind of how I'm looking at it from the 30,000 foot view. If I want to really make this a thing that we can learn from on the 3,000 foot view, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean that plays into the idea never waste a crisis, right? Like you have something happen, and you can either grow together and band together and work harder and overcome it, or you can allow it to spiral. And I don't think Matt Rule is going to allow this to spiral. I don't think this is the sort of thing that can derail their season, or it shouldn't be the sort of thing that can derail their season. It's just a shift in the staff that Matt Rule has put together, and now we're going to see how that plays out. Again, I think in John Butler, they hired a defensive backs coach who had a better resume than Evan Cooper when he came here, just from a coaching standpoint. And so I think, I don't know that there's going to be a loss in that defensive backs room as to who's teaching and developing these guys. I think the bigger loss is more so what it means for their recruiting operation and how quickly they can shift gears in that regard. It doesn't have to be a loss at all, but I just know that he had a lot of value in there.
Schaefer, as you kind of look at John Butler, and you mentioned his resume, how much do you think, if at all, factored into him ending up being the choice the fact that he may be a easy candidate to replace Tony White when Tony White eventually leaves?
I think it's a big part of it. I mean, I think that Evan Cooper was the guy that was going to replace Tony White if that was what ultimately happened. And so I think you find yourself in a situation where you're hiring a coach in early July and you have a guy with this extensive resume, and you also know in the back of your head, hey, if this season goes how we think it can, how we want it to, Tony White's not going to be here. And that's not a bad thing. That means that you've done well, he's done well, and he's moved on. He's growing in his career, but you should also be ready for that. And having a guy like John Butler allows you to be ready for that. And as I said before, it gives Matt Rule the opportunity to work with him and to see, like, okay, is this someone that I think I can work with, that I would want to be one of my top lieutenants, that I can elevate in this role? And you might get to next December and decide, you know what? Maybe it's somebody else on staff. Maybe we do have to go out, and maybe I have to find someone that's worked for me in the past. Maybe John Butler isn't going to love being at Nebraska. There's too many unknowns. But right now, on July 9th, I think they've done a really nice job in replacing in a weird situation, replacing and then potentially setting themselves up well.
Hey, Schaefer, only a couple minutes left, but how many people do you think know or have in your sphere of influence have talked about Sean Hammerbeck committing a couple of days before the holiday? And it's almost like, I don't even know if anybody's talked about him yet.
I don't know if they have either. I like to call him offensive Nash Hutmacher. I mean, that's basically what I'm seeing here. We got small town South Dakota, great athlete, unique last name, also starts with an H. So that's maybe where the comparison's in. But no, he's a freak lineman that's from South Dakota in an area that's going to be lightly recruited, but there's Paul Bunyan-esque tales about what this guy can do.
Where
He's a great It's north of Valentine, basically.
Huh. Okay.
That's what I learned. Now, how far north? I can't tell. It's not far from the Nebraska border, but it's just north of Valentine, Nebraska.
Yeah.
Which is
somewhere between here and Canada. That's all I know.
That's accurate. That is accurate.
But yeah, this little wiggle room.
This is another good offensive line pickup. I mean, we went from some real social media hand-wringing about 2.5-3 weeks ago about where this offensive line class was to now they've got a guy in Sean Hammerbeck that I think people are pretty excited about. They have a guy in Houston Kahina Torres who I think people should be really excited about. They have Brian Tapu, who flipped from Oregon State, and I think Nebraska is intrigued by what he could be as a development guy. They're in the mix for David Sanders Jr., made the top 4 there, and they're not just a hat on the table. Like, I think there's a real opportunity here. Now, can they jump past Tennessee and Ohio State? We'll see. But it's a fascinating time for offensive line recruiting when just 2.5 weeks ago, there was a lot of, why can't they get any offensive linemen? Well, now they've got 3 and potential for a really, really big 4th.
So the sky may not be falling. Mike J. Schaefer, you heard it here first. Schaefer,
direct quote.
Yeah, nothing says pie in the sky like Mike Schaefer, right? I mean,
the eternal optimist, Mike J. Schaefer.
Absolutely.
24/7. Thank you, Schaefer.
Thanks, Schaefer.
All right, guys. Have a good one.